Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. It is Children's Grief Awareness Day. We are so glad that you are all here. I'm Evelyn Moon. I'm Director of Education at Good Grief, and I have the honor and privilege of curating our webinar series every September through June, providing completely free opportunities for our community to learn, to grow, and to connect. Today's session is part of that, but also in honor of Children's Grief Awareness Day as well. Every third Thursday of November, we celebrate Children's Grief Awareness Day for children and teens to raise awareness and advocacy around childhood grief. So we're so glad that you are here. If you are in the chat right now, please feel free to hop on, click everyone if you can, unless you just want to send a message to myself or Chris, that's fine as well. But click everyone and let us know, who you are, where you're from, whether that's geography, a school, another organization. We want to know who's here. So hop on in that chat as we get started. Let's see, I'll give people a moment to type. Oh, yes, I should say hello. I'm here in Princeton, in our Princeton Center. You can see I'm in the teen center. Garfield, Queens, Morris Plains, Dallas, Texas. Awesome. Yeah, keep hopping in that chat, keep connecting with one another. For those of you who may be new to Good Grief, we are a nonprofit organization. We are based out of New Jersey, and our mission is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. So for most of our organization's history, we've been providing completely free and unlimited peer support programming to grieving children and their families. We've also been pushing out into that virtual space a little bit more, whether it's through our virtual peer support or through opportunities like this. We've also been partnering with hospitals, healthcare settings, schools, the funeral industry, private corporations. Essentially, we just want to bring the support and the resources wherever the grievers are and empower the communities to support them. So since it's Children's Grief Awareness Day, I'll do a little show and tell. So if you have a grieving child or family in your life, or if you have a child, right now who might need some support, if they are near Morristown or Princeton, they can come in person, but we're also providing support virtually over Zoom. So our family support centers, we have nights of support. We joke, we say we go from age 3 to 30 with our young people. So we do have some very vibrant and lively young adult groups. Groups are run by volunteer facilitators. So if you're feeling like you really want to get involved on this Children's Grief Awareness Day, reach out. We always need in-person and virtual facilitators, and our programs are completely free and unlimited. This is some of our other programming. We have our schoolwork. We run a day camp every summer in partnership with AmeriHealth. We have our Good Grief Spring Institute, which is happening this March 18th at the Pingree School. We do PD, parent and caregiver education, and we have a youth and funerals initiative. Woo, that chat is going. We have no support programs directly in Queens, but we do provide some virtual support. So after this session, I will be sharing some resources from Good Grief and also from our wonderful presenter, who I'm going to introduce just now. So we have Dr. Christina Liparini. She is a good friend of Good Grief. I will be here monitoring the chat and the Q&A, but Chris, you feel free to take over the screen share and take it away.
All right, great. You can hear me, right? Okay, I always get a little nervous. Just want to make sure everything's a-okay. I am so glad to be here. I am so glad that you asked me to be a part of today. I'm always happy to do a webinar, but it feels especially meaningful today to be able to contribute, to do my part, to acknowledge our children and their grief. And my goal today is really to give you some tools that you can take away. I know when I go to a webinar or any kind of training, I want to have something to take away that I can immediately do, I can implement. And my hope today is that I offer that to you. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself and today's training. Okay, great. Okay, so I come to you all from St. Elizabeth University. I see I have at least one of my team members, my colleagues in the psychology department, joining us today. I have been at St. Elizabeth just a couple months, but have fallen in love with the community. I'm also, so happy to be a part of the Good Grief community. Community is so important, and I consider myself really lucky to be a part of several really great communities. So today we're going to talk about bibliotherapy in grief support. And some of you may know what that term means. Some of you may not, and that is okay. It sounds super fancy, but we'll break it down. And it is a therapy we can all implement, therapist or not. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we talk more about me and my background, I would like to hear a little bit about yours. So if you could just scan this QR code, and I'm going to take us now to the Mentimeter to check out your role. I'd like to get a sense of, I know we saw the chat was firing up a little bit with who we have in the audience, but I wanted to see a little bit more exactly our breakdown. Okay. And I realize you may have more than one role, so you could just pick the one that stands out most to you. Okay, we'll just give it another minute for those of us who are not as QR savvy. That would be me. Okay. So we see that there's a bit of a mix here. And again, you may have more than one role. So for myself, I would consider myself a mental health professional, a teacher, and also another supporter role, because I wear a lot of hats when it comes to grief and being able to use my skills or just who I am as a person to support kids who are grieving and to help others understand how to better support our kids who are grieving. All right, great. So we are all filling different roles. Let me go back to my presentation here. So we are all in different roles. Let me tell you a little bit about mine. So my qualifications, like I mentioned, I have a lot of different hats, but if we're talking about my formal hats, I'm a licensed psychologist and licensed professional counselor in New Jersey. I am a lifelong resident of New Jersey, and I've hopped around working at a few different universities as adjunct faculty, professor, and as a psychologist or counselor in university counseling centers. So I've seen a lot from both my students as well as my clients, our grievers as they get to young adulthood, late adolescence. Right now, I'm assistant professor at St. Elizabeth University and also the director of our counseling psychology PsyD program. If we have anyone in the audience who says, hey, I'd like to pursue my education further, I've always been thinking about getting my doctorate, or even if you've been thinking about getting your master's in counseling, talk to me. I'd love to talk to you about what our university offers. But among my qualifications, the ones that I think give me a lot of cred talking about bibliotherapy, I have been an avid reader since I was a child. I have always gotten lost in a good book, and I am a library lover. So I am proud to say that this summer, for the first time with my daughter, I actually hit the limit on books that I could take out at our library system, which was over 100 books. So a lot of pressure to find all 100 books. But yes, I promote a love of reading in my kids, and I did return them all. So I'm proud of that as well. That's not always the case. And as I mentioned, I have kids. I have a 5-year-old and an 11-year-old, one of whom loves to read and another one who's more of a reluctant reader. So I enjoy trying to engage both with reading and finding what their passion is, what they enjoy reading. As part of being a library lover, I am a former president of our town's Friends of the Library, and I was also on our board of trustees here in the Parsippany Library System. So I'm really passionate about libraries, passionate about books, and all the opportunities, the worlds that open up to us through books and our libraries, of how they allow us, equity and equal access to those materials. Okay, so that's me. I hope you liked my meme over there on the side. And that's where I did carry it over to the next slide, because thinking about you, do you have any special talents? Sometimes we think we don't really have any special talents, right, when it comes to ourselves when we're thinking about doing bibliotherapy, right? Like, how am I going to use this? Like I mentioned, it seems like a really formal technique when you think of that word. If we want to make sure we're doing it right, and we'll talk about that today. But I included this meme again on the page for you of, do you have any special talents? All of you here in those different roles are qualified to assist kids in their grief, as long as you're invested in it. Like, you really want to do this. You're committed to it. You're committed to the ups and downs that are inevitably going to come, how things are not going to go as planned. We all know that if we've had any interactions with kids, sometimes best laid plans go right out the window. That will happen with this as well. And also recognizing boundaries in the role. Some of you identified as counselors, some of you identified as teachers or otherwise supporters. Deciding what your role is here, being clear about the role. It's called bibliotherapy, but that does not mean it's therapy, depending on your role. And we'll talk more about that in a minute and the model that we're going to use based upon that to make this something that's appropriate for everybody to use. So again, the boundaries of the role, and perhaps most importantly, putting in the work. So this isn't just picking up a book and deciding to use it with a young person. It's about really being intentional about our selection of it, the implementation of it, and the follow-up. So before, during, and after reading, we're putting in the work. Okay, so this is not just going to the library and pulling a book off the shelf and using it. And we'll definitely talk more about that. So what is bibliotherapy when we use this big old word of bibliotherapy? I really like this definition. In essence, when we're using books or other media, so it could be a television show, a clip from YouTube, whatever it might be, artwork, whatever, as our springboard to talking about both normal development, so normal, like just normal developmental, milestones or happenings for young people, or clinically significant problems. So it can be either problems of daily living, developmental challenges that we all face. And that's why I'm wearing my Good Grief shirt today. My Grief is Good shirt that I love when I get swag, and Good Grief gave me this swag early on. And grief is developmental. It's a part of life. Grief is good. That's an intentional motto from Good Grief. Grief is part of life. Grief is part of love. And so we're talking about normal development here. Grief is not pathological. I could put an asterisk after that, and we could get into a whole discussion, the mental health folks, about DSM and what they're deciding. But for the most part, grief is not pathological. It is part of life. It is something that we have to wrestle with, find our way through, and be forever changed by. It's part of normal development. So when we're using bibliotherapy, you might find it being called different names, referenced as biblio-guidance, biblio-counseling, book matching, which sounds almost like there can be an app for that, right? Getting matched with your book. Maybe that's what it is when I'm on Goodreads and I find out what my friends are reading, or reading therapy. All these different names, same process. So use whatever works for you. Okay, so again, bibliotherapy might have more of that therapeutic clinical connotation, whereas biblio-guidance or book matching sounds a little more, user-friendly, less stigmatized. So let's talk very, very brief history. What is bibliotherapy? When did this all start? Some could argue that it began with Aristotle. So we're talking going way back. We're talking about catharsis, right? Aristotle talked about things that gave us like that platform for catharsis through theater, through different works, through questioning. So again, part of that being the catharsis as the end goal. Shakespeare wrote about visiting his library for books and the books that could lead to grief, expressing one's sadness and grief. So Shakespeare loved the written word, but he also loved how it could be used to help us feel things. So getting more into that bibliotherapy and clinical, Sigmund and Anna Freud, now we're getting real Freudian and we're thinking about psychoanalysis here. They loved the use of literature to lead to that emotional catharsis, that reaction that folks would have. So they were looking for that big emotional reaction using the written word or books as kind of the stimuli for that. So when I was really delving into bibliotherapy a little bit more and its history, I also discovered that it was used a lot during World War I, which I didn't know about. They often would give books to soldiers recovering as part of their therapy, as part of their recovery. That reading was going to be part of their healing. So it was even used in World War I in that more informal way. And then we started using that term around 1916, and it just started building from there. You found it really had this uptick in the 50s and 60s, people talking a lot more about using books. And now, since the age of the internet, I feel like it's really exploded. We may not all know about it, but I'm going to share some resources. You can get a lot from the internet, a lot of great sites, a lot of great references to help you with your practice of bibliocounseling or book matching. You do not have to recreate the wheel, which is great. For the teachers here, good news, I'm not asking you to make another lesson plan. You can borrow it without even using Teachers Pay Teachers. You can get free ones. So I hope that helps. I always look for a good freebie. So I'm going to tip you off today with a couple freebies that you can walk away with. But yes, there is a lot out there of free resources that you can use. So it is this community out there that you may not be aware of, but we're going to learn how to tap into that. Okay. So as I mentioned, there's two different kinds. Clinical bibliotherapy is used by mental health professionals, really looking at emotional, behavioral problems and looking at how we can use those books to help, the young people reach their therapeutic goals. Whereas developmental bibliotherapy, which is what we're going to talk about today, can be used by all of us to help children through transitions. We're working with relatively healthy individuals encountering day-to-day problems of daily living, developmental challenges that many of us experience. Okay. So you'll see I added some of my favorite books here in the art. I didn't get to do all of them. I would have had lots of books on different pages, but these are some of the books that I do enjoy using with kids. There are a lot of variations we can use. So what I also really enjoy about bibliotherapy is the room for creativity and customization. So there are a lot of different ways that you can use this. You can use both fiction and nonfiction. You can use this with individuals. You can use this with groups. So this can be led with a whole class, facilitated with a whole class, or one-on-one. It can be as directive as you and the participants want it to be. You could be really directive with it, or it could be really reader-led. So that's going to be about your style, the audience's style, thinking about what the best match is. So that's the good news and the bad news is there's all this different room for creativity, but you might feel like, well, where do I even start then? Almost like analysis paralysis, too many options. Like just give it to me and I can go from there. So we'll talk a little bit now about where we go. What do we do? Okay. But before we do that, I really want to sell you a little bit on all of the benefits of bibliotherapy. Right? So look at all these different aspects of what the potential that it has. Okay? Skill building. They can increase their awareness, their insight, figure out how to problem solve. Right? By seeing what the characters are doing, they figure out, well, I didn't realize that was the way I could deal with that. Taking in new values and attitudes, different perspectives. Right? Like, I never thought about the way things were, like Gerald Elephant, but then I learned Gerald's viewpoint. Okay. It's a great platform for discussion. It's a great springboard. So starting with a book, especially, there's so many great titles. There's so many great covers and there's great artwork. It's really appealing. It kind of lures the kids in. It keeps their interest, and then we can lead to the discussion. So it's a great way to engage. Now, before I add some more, how about in the chat? What else do you think bibliotherapy books can bring to young readers? I'd like to hear from you. All right. I cannot see my
Mm.
chat anymore.
All good. There's a lot of good things coming in. I see
Okay.
comfort, validation. It can calm them. It can
Yeah.
show them that they're not alone, create connections, also representation, help them feel less alone in their feelings, validation, a surprised interest maybe in
Ah,
books, um, and the power to control their emotions and give them tools that they need, not only to help themselves, but to help others.
ah.
Um, and just to sit and let them realize someone's there. With a really young kid, I would imagine you're probably sitting next to them or in front of them with the book.
Ah, the power of presence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is why I love when we can all get together, because you came up with ones that exceeded what literature has told us. So because you're human beings, whether you're a teacher, a counselor, supportive in whatever role, you're talking about the human experience with connection and what we know about what works for people, what the potential is when we're reading or being challenged in some way or exposed to something, a different viewpoint, a different perspective. So absolutely all of those things. I love the one about, the power of presence and calming. It can be something to center someone. Absolutely. Love of reading. It can promote a love of reading or more interest, open up a door that maybe the reader thought was closed because they don't like, let's say they don't like fiction, but maybe they discover nonfiction. Maybe they discover graphic novels and the power of those, that there is more than one way to engage in reading. Absolutely. So here are some of the other ones that came up. That sense of not being alone. Right? I'm not the only one. So in mindfulness, we talk about universality. That it doesn't make the pain go away or the suffering, but realizing we are not the only one. There's some comfort in that sense of universality. Problem solving, skill building, some other things that I think are more, so important now more than ever are the ability that books have to foster empathy in young people, to take the perspective of others and really understand how that person might feel in a situation that they've never encountered before, a person unlike them, and a situation unlike those they've experienced, and also increase compassion for other people, right? So books offer us a really accessible way to take different perspectives. And last, but certainly not least, they also can help instill cultural identity and ethnic pride in our readers. And we're going to talk towards the end of today's webinar about resources and the importance of accessing those resources for diversity in our literature. All right. And I've intentionally, in some of the readings or the pictures that you're seeing here, included books that represent more than the white child as our central character. And later on, preview, not shockingly, the majority of our books still have a white main character. Okay, but these titles, some of these titles do not. So even when we're looking at the hands here in honor of broken things, it's a story about different children, middle school children from different backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and how they're dealing with a loss that one of them has experienced, the death of a young person. Okay. Gerald is obviously an elephant. Okay, we're going to talk about the use of monsters like the color monster and Gerald. They definitely have a place, and there are pros and cons to monsters and animals and whatever else. But up here, we're going to do a read along in a few minutes. We're going to talk about Taylor. Okay. But the diversity is so important. Absolutely. So there are a few important caveats to consider before we go out and say, I'm doing bibliotherapy, I'm ready. A lot of times we mean well, and we either head to Barnes and Noble, we go to our bookshelf in our office, or we go to the library and we're ready and we're picking books by, cover. And we're like, this looks good. We need to think beyond the cover. So first thing we need to think about is, where am I going to get my materials? Like I mentioned, the library is a great resource. If you're in a school setting, reaching out to colleagues, rating their bookshelves, sharing resources. Again, the library, my library system, we could take out over 100 books. So you definitely can take out a lot of books. So the first thing is finding the materials. You also need to think about how willing the child is to sit with you and read, or for you to read to them to take part in sharing the reading responsibilities, whatever it might be. And are they ready? Are they really fresh off a loss and not ready to sit down? We need to respect that. There may be times where it's too soon or the wrong timing, or it's going to be really rushed. The child is looking at the clock because it's close to pickup time and they're wondering where mom or dad or grandma is. Okay, that's thinking about, is this the right time? The reader's comfort, how comfortable they are with reading. And again, are they open to exploring their grief and loss? Is it the right time? So then we get into the part of your knowledge. You need to think about the book itself. So what do you think we need to look for in a book? And Evelyn, I don't know how many people we have, if we have anybody that, we could call on to share what they think is important in the book, or if we want to go back to the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think the chat is good. I see some people already hopping in there.
Great.
I see age appropriate.
Okay.
Yep, couple votes for age appropriate. There was an ask to repeat the question as well.
Sure. So what are we looking for in a book? What do you think is the recipe for what we're looking for in a book?
I see easy to navigate, covering the interest of the child. I could see that, tapping into some interest that you are already aware of. If it's aligned with our values, if you're doing this at home with your family, you want to think about that. And this is a good one too, sensitivity to situation.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just jump off those last couple of points of, the appropriateness to values and beliefs. So especially when we're talking about death and dying and grief and loss, some books have a really religious undertone. So you definitely need to screen your materials to make sure that it aligns with the values and the beliefs of your reader, their family. There's nothing worse than getting halfway through a book that you didn't screen and it takes a real turn and you're like, oh, I don't know, how am I going to spin this one? So that's why it's so important to pre-screen. Is it appropriate? Is it based on, their values, their beliefs? Evelyn, could you go back to the second thing? I lost my train of thought. Somebody had made another point I wanted to come back to.
Yeah, the sensitivity to the situation is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about grief and loss, the good news is that our literature has really expanded to almost find a book for every type of grief and loss, including disenfranchised grief. So talking also about the losses and the grief that we might not typically acknowledge or encompass when we're talking about that. So there are books about children whose parents are incarcerated and the loss that they're experiencing. How powerful would that be for a child to be able to have a book speak to them about that type of loss versus a book that's talking about a parent who has died from a prolonged illness, right? So exactly, can we speak to their specific type of loss, their situation? The good news is more and more we can. Okay, so there are books about sudden loss. There are books about lengthy illnesses. There are books about grief and loss due to violence, of domestic violence, community violence. We also, speaking unfortunately that we need this, but books because of racial violence, race-motivated violence. So there, you can find almost any configuration, but just because also the problem or the situation may be similar, you also have to make sure the values that are kind of underpinning that story also fit. So again, the importance of pre-screening. Okay. Yeah. So the great thing about all these different books too, are that some of our popular characters are engaged in these books as the main character. So if you have a young person who's really into Daniel Tiger, Man, Daniel Tiger is really in touch with his feelings. And Daniel Tiger, the show and the books, there is a psychologist, a developmental psychologist who is a part of that. So you can also engage the reader when the main character is someone they're really excited about, or trucks, or whatever. There are a lot of great books that engage characters that children really love. Paw Patrol, they've done a great job too. Shout out to Paw Patrol for talking about feelings. So there are a lot of great things. Which also gets back to the idea of books are one way, but again, we can be creative and use an episode of a TV show to begin talking about a topic. So if you have a kid who is not a reader or who will not sit there and read through a book, but will be moving around the room watching Daniel Tiger, work with it. The beauty is we can be creative. We can be flexible with this. It's more about where we end up than how we got there. So give yourself permission to also have fun with it. This can be something that's really creative and engages us. So that gets to the last part here about rigidity. That can really get in our way. If we go in saying, we've got this plan, this is exactly how it's going to go. We're going to spend 15 minutes on the story, and then we're going to do this follow-up activity. And we have a young person cutting us off and talking during the story and going off on meaningful tangents about the person who died or other things going on in their life. We need to go with that. Right? Do we want to redirect them back to the story? We want to focus less on the content than the feelings and other experiences that are coming up for the reader. So it's not important that they know the storyline or we stick to the storyline. It's about using that to lead to these other things as a launching off to talking about other things. Okay, so you got to loosen up when you're doing bibliotherapy. You've got to have some fun with it. And part of the fun is even in that preparation of looking for materials. One of my favorite things is going to the library and picking out books. First, I go to Barnes & Noble and I look at all the books that I'm not going to buy and I make my list. And then I go to the library and I request them all. So that can be part of the fun, doing the research. Okay, so now let's get down to what I know you also want to know today. How do we do this? So there are 4 stages. For the clinicians out there, there's a different model when we're talking about clinical bibliotherapy. This is the developmental model. So again, this could be used with anyone. So our teachers here, you could use this with your whole class because everybody can benefit from talking about ways to navigate life's challenges and that perspective taking and that building of empathy. So again, this is applicable to everyone. If you obviously do have a student who has more clinically significant concerns, you might want to read more about doing bibliotherapy from that clinical model. But this can be used with everybody. So step 1 here is identification and selection. And I've talked about that a bit already. It's one of the most difficult stages because we really have to put in the work to find the right materials. So like I said, I'm a Barnes & Noble library user, but we really need to match. The most important thing is not how you do it, but to match it to the student that you're working with or the child you're working with. Okay. Research has told us that when a counselor is checking out and selecting the materials, that's probably the best bet, but not all of us have the advantage of working with a counselor to find the right materials. So again, there are some great sites online that offer us some leads as well. The American Psychological Association has their own imprint of books that have developmental themes that have involved therapists in their construction, their publication, but there are also other avenues of web pages that you can find where therapists are recommending different books. Okay. So part of the identification is we have to know the child, right? So rather than just getting a report from a teacher, if you're a school counselor saying, I think this, student is really struggling with this recent loss. I think it might be helpful. And you're thinking, great, this bibliotherapy thing I just heard about could be useful. I've got this book and they lost their mother. Here we go. First, you really still need to sit with that student and build that relationship to really get an honest assessment of what their needs are. So relationship is at the heart from the very beginning, from my understanding what their needs are to when we're doing the actual reading and follow-up activities. So the relationship with the reader and the person on the other side of the reading is really important. And for anyone who's ever read a book with a child, it can feel really great. It can be a nice part of our relationship. So a relationship does need to exist as we're starting the process of bibliotherapy. Okay. Also, Let's move to selection. Some other points that I'm not sure we mentioned, but are important to highlight when it comes to selection of the book is make sure it is current. Okay. There's a lot of classics out there. Some of them have been updated, some of them have not, with the language used to describe individuals, situations. So make sure your literature is current. And with all the resources we have, there's no reason you have to go with a book that is outdated. So make sure it's current, make sure it's credible, and it meets the client's needs. Okay. And look for that, inclusiveness and cultural representation in the books. So we've selected our book. We figured out our clients' or child's needs. We've selected the book. What do we do now? Now it's time for the big show. We're presenting it, whether it's in front of a class or one-on-one sitting down with a child at home, at school, wherever that might be. Now comes the time to present the book. Okay. One of the most important things when we are reading through the book with the child is to make sure that they are able to see the similarities or the links between themselves and the character. So that might mean during presentation, we ask some questions. Can you relate to how Froggy's feeling? Wow, how do you think he is feeling? What might you feel in a situation like that? We don't want to be heavy-handed, but there are certainly times maybe we take that pause and we use some gentle questioning to help them see the relationship between themselves and the character in the book. Okay. So we can be really directive with this, or we might have a child who initiates that and says, I've been in a situation like Froggy when my dad died, blah, 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 blah. So again, you can plan for this, but part of it is just going to be a game time decision based upon what the child brings to the reading experience. Depending on the age of the child and their reading level, you might share the reading responsibilities, or you might be the reader. That's something you might discuss with them in advance or right before you start. But that's also appropriate for the child to be part of the reading. Okay. But yes, you can absolutely stop during the book and ask things like, what do you think the character's feeling? How would you feel when this is happening? Wait, did anything like that ever happen to you? And make those links. You can also use questions at certain points of the story of, what do you think is going to happen next? What would you do if you were in Froggy's situation? Those type of questions can be a part of the reading, because remember, it's not so much about the content, but about the process. Okay. So the goal during presentation, what we want to have happen is for the child to identify with the character, whether the character is a young tiger or a young child that looks like them. Why are there so many monsters and animals in children's literature? I think they're very approachable. So I think sometimes if we have a child who might be a little more reluctant, it can be a safer character to identify with. It feels less obvious, right, that we're trying to make this connection. It can feel safer to identify with an animal or a color monster. So that's why we do have animals and monsters, and I think there is certainly a place for them. But you may find times that when your reader is feeling really isolated and alone, it might be especially helpful to have a human going through the same experience to create that sense of, I am not the only one, to bring it more to the real world. Okay, so then there's follow-up, which I think is one of the most fun and creative stages of this whole process. We're going to do a lot of different things during this. We're going to want to reinforce what we talked about in the story and give them a chance to be creative and express themselves. Okay? We can do this at home. We can do it right after the reading. We can have them do it independently, do it something together. So if you have a whole classroom, this could be an activity for everyone, or it could be something that you assign or give them an option to do at home. You can provide information to caregivers about what you did in ways that they can carry this over at home. Maybe they can all do something together. And again, we're not focused on the story content. We're focused more on problem solving and the emotional issues that came up for the character and are coming up for our reader. So what do we get to do? What are some of the fun things we get to do? Before I go through mine, I'd like to hear from participants. If you've ever done anything like this, whether you realized it was bibliotherapy or not, what are some fun follow-up activities you've had with young people that weren't about them summarizing the story, but more like what they took away, their feelings or experiences. What are some things you've done either individually or with a whole class or group of children?
I popped the question in the chat, although if they've done really fun follow-up activities, they might need a little bit more time to type it
Oh,
out.
sure. Yeah. Well, while that's coming in, let me tell, for the sake of time, let me tell you some ideas that come from the literature as far as follow-up. So drawing, there are lots of different things we can do to draw. We can draw thermometers of feelings. The Color Monster book has this great printout of a blank color monster, and kids can fill it in based on how they feel. In my doctoral program, one of the students who's doing her clinical placement, working with a young child, I'm stealing this from her. She found the printout of the Color Monster and used it in session with a 6-year-old girl. And it was really a great place for them to start discussing what she is feeling, okay, including where she feels it in her body, when she feels it. You can have kids draw cartoon boxes, like a strip from a comic or cartoon or graphic novel. Something that my son did at school, which props to his teachers, was talking about making links between himself and the book character, was this Venn diagram of the differences and then the overlapping with a Venn diagram, the similarities between himself and this character in the book, who was, it was the book New Kid. And it was about, I think it was an African-American boy who goes to a new school. And my son just started middle school. So he was able to see these similarities, but also the differences. He was new to a school, but he was going with all his friends, whereas this character was not. My son is white. This child was African-American, talking about those differences. So again, I think it helped him take perspective about somebody different than himself. For kids who like to write, writing a new ending to a book, okay, projecting what might happen to this character in the future and writing their biography about where they are in the future, or a news release or a news article about the story. Okay. They can also work on talking together, identifying problem-solving steps, what the character did, what strengths the character has and areas they still need to grow, and then talking about themselves. What are their strengths? What are things they need to work on? That can be something that can take place with artwork or conversation, that identification. And some of the collective things that can be done is maybe creating a bulletin board in a classroom or in a school. Creating a board game, that's something that could be done collaboratively, or maybe working one-on-one, or a treasure hunt, or a bank of problems. I know at Good Grief, sometimes we do those type of activities where we have question jars, or people are creating memory boxes where they're putting things into their box. So opportunities to do things like that are great. I have to say, this is not limited to young children. You may not be reading a picture book with a middle schooler or teen, but there's also great literature they can be reading and that you can be doing activities around. Last year, I had the pleasure of co-facilitating the teen group for Good Grief on Nights of Support. And the teenagers were very vocal that they wanted the activities and the crafts that the younger children were getting. Why were they not getting them? And it was one of the highlights each time we met, that they wanted to be doing these things. And we had a lot of really creative, artistic participants who really enjoyed being able to create. So don't minimize that. And there is a lot of great YA literature out there talking about difficult themes. My son hates when I talk about him in these things, but don't share this with him. But over the summer, we read this book, Sal and Gabby Break the Universe. And in the book, Sal has type 1 diabetes, is Latino, and moves to a new city. His friend Gabby, also Latina, has a younger brother who's in the NICU, and his condition is very precarious. These are some heavy issues that this book is talking about, and my son wanted to read it every night. And we could talk about what was going on. Right. So we weren't reading together in a sense, but we were almost doing our own little book club talking about it, and certainly could be doing some of these creative activities or writing assignments after that. So as a therapist mom, he's probably glad I didn't make him do an activity, but certainly you could. All right.
Chris, I see in the chat, someone had asked if there's any thoughts on doing this with adults, because I know we've talked about young kids, we've talked
Yeah.
about older kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of that, what often comes up are talking about nonfiction books, but I think I would make the argument that fiction books can also be great around a certain theme, and adults could also do these activities. Right? Journaling is another one that can come up out of this for, maybe not something they share, but doing journaling. I think there's a real place in, holding space for adults to do this too. Absolutely. I think it has to be agreed upon. Like, we're not duping children or adults, especially adults. We're not like covertly making it a grief book and they didn't know. So there has to be kind of this informed collaboration saying, all right, who would be interested in doing a book that has a theme about, child loss or something like that? And again, making sure, because we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with that and is not going to be triggered. So self-selection for something like that. Yeah, but that would be a really great book club idea. Getting away from using it to gossip and have wine. This other kind of creation of a book club would be great too. Although I've been in a lot of book clubs that don't just have wine and gossip. So yeah, the potential for using this with adults, I think, is definitely there. All right, so let's talk for a minute about diversity in children's books. So we have some work to do. All right, when we're looking at our characters in books, we can see that there was some progress from 2015 to 2018, but our numbers that we're seeing of percentages represented are not keeping pace with what we're seeing in larger society. And if you look at the animals and white, we may have fewer white characters in the book, but we're just kind of lending most of that over to animals. So the percentage between animals and white characters is about the same, whereas we're really stagnant with the percentages of American Indians, First Nations, Indigenous people, Latinx culture, Pacific Islanders, Southeast Asians, African Americans. Our representation is still not where it needs to be. So this was 2018. So I had my fingers crossed. I was like, let me find something more current, because I bet it's going to be better. Not so much. It's a little better. Lots of animals still. Again, I'm not dissing animals. They have a place, but we're still seeing primarily white children represented. You'll see a little bit of an uptick here. I appreciate this statistical report from the Cooperative Children's Book Center because it also included disability status. So we're seeing just a really small percentage of our books with main characters who have a disability. Looking at that, even the percentages when we're looking at Pacific Islander, Arab, Middle Eastern, Indigenous peoples, they're not even getting on the chart as far as 1 or 2%. So we definitely have a lot of work to do. But do not despair. Like I said, there are a lot of great online resources. And one of those resources is We Need Diverse Books. So let me end this because this is the end of that part. So let me bring you over to We Need Diverse Books. Okay, so great resource here. All right. So you're going to find a plethora of resources referring you to different books, different publishing companies that are, at the forefront of hiring editors, hiring anybody in the office that is looking for books that are more diverse. Also, for those of you who are coming from more, low income, less supported schools, they also offer resources to hook you up with nationwide distribution of books to classrooms, organizations that are giving out books to classrooms in need. So great resource here.
Chris, could you tell me the website? We're still seeing your end screen from the presentation.
Oh, okay, hold on. Let me see. Can I share screen again? Here we go.
Yeah.
How about this? Let's see. Can you see me now?
There we go.
Okay, We Need Diverse Books. So great organization with resources. Like I mentioned, not just book lists, but some grants you can apply for other resources to get some books. But you can see that they have these great, by topic articles. There are other organizations. So if you just also search it up on the internet and put in diverse picture books, you're going to see some blogs, some other organizations. Those of you who are looking for grief-specific resources, the New York Public Library has one that has a pretty good list. Or was there another one? Let's see. Hold on. Let me see. I don't want to lose you, but hold on. Let me move my bar here. Maya Smart Picture Books. Here's another woman who's done a great. Okay, so Maya Smart Books. She gives us a lot of books on different topics or just plain fun books that don't have a focus that's, about a developmental or clinical issue, but really show characters of color, that they are a central part of our stories here, or just some plain great classics like we just discovered in my house, The Day the Crayons Quit. And now we are on a crayon rabbit hole where we've requested every single crayon book by that author and illustrator. But again, lots of great books, resources, but also looking at this, you see Passover represented. So different holidays. My school for maybe the second year did a great job bringing in books about Diwali and things happening in our Parsippany community for our Southeast Asian families. So again, I found this by doing an online search. So we're getting better. What you can do to help with that is really highlight these books and highlight them, pull them out, include them in your rotation. Like I mentioned, the library may be a great place to start. Okay, and looking at the time we have left, I am just going to show you for a second a book that I have often used with my students to talk a little bit about just what we do as counselors, what we do as support people. So we've talked about this at Good Grief on a facilitator night. What do we do with problems and what is our role? And this book, The Rabbit Listened, and I'm probably not showing my screen again, am I?
No, you're showing the screen. We're seeing the YouTube page. And if there's an audio component, we'll just want to make sure that we're sharing the audio as well.
Great. Okay. And then I stopped sharing.
It's okay.
All right.
We're all good.
All right. Okay. I'll just show you real quick. I really like this story. I think it's a great analogy for what we do when a child's world comes tumbling down, what's helpful and what's not. And again, there are some free guides that come with it. So I'll just go right to that too. Tandem Partners in Early Learning does a great guide for this book. So all these different activities, and one of them is about the animals in the book, about how they make the main character feel and using listening ears like the rabbit. So again, we don't have to create all of this. Some people have done a great job getting us started, but let's just take a quick listen to The Rabbit Listened, which is a great story to cover not just one specific issue, but just our children's feelings when they encounter difficulties.
One day, Taylor decided to build something new, something special. Something amazing. Taylor was so proud. But then, out of nowhere, things came crashing down. The chicken was the first to notice. Cluck, cluck, what a shame. I'm so sorry this happened. Let's talk about it. Cluck, cluck. But Taylor didn't feel like talking, so the chicken left. Next came the bear. Grr, roar, how horrible. I bet you feel so angry. Let's shout about it. Grr, roar, grr. But Taylor didn't feel like shouting, so the bear left. The elephant knew just what to do. Trumpa-duh, I can fix this. We just need to remember exactly the way things were. But Taylor didn't feel like remembering, so the elephant also left. One by one they came. The hyena, hey, let's laugh about it. The ostrich, go, let's hide and pretend nothing happened. The kangaroo, tisk, tisk, what a mess. Let's throw it all away. And the snake, shh, let's go knock down someone else's. But Taylor didn't feel like doing anything with anybody. So eventually they all left until Taylor was alone. In the quiet, Taylor didn't even notice the rabbit, but it moved closer and closer until Taylor could feel its warm body. Together they sat in silence until Taylor said, "Please stay with me." The rabbit listened. The rabbit listened as Taylor talked. The rabbit listened as Taylor shouted. The rabbit listened as Taylor remembered and laughed. The rabbit listened to Taylor's plans to hide, to throw everything away, to ruin things for someone else. Through it all, the rabbit never left. And when the time was right, the rabbit listened to Taylor's plans to build again. "I can't wait," Taylor said. "It's going to be amazing."
All right. And I thought that was a fitting way to wrap up today. It is an honor for us to be the rabbit for our grieving children and to help them figure out how they can move forward and what their new castle, what they're going to build. It will never be the same, but we can be there for them. And I'm so glad that I got to participate today. And hopefully you feel like you have some tools to help our grieving kids. And thank you, Evelyn and Good Grief, so much for having me here today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I love this webinar. Chris, thank you so much. I feel like it's giving folks practical tools to support grief and grievers, not just on Children's Grief Awareness Day, but any day, so any day beyond even just this session. And books are such a powerful tool, even in our centers, whether it's in person, whether it's on our virtual nights. It is something that we use even in our grief group curriculum for our schools. And I also appreciated your focus on building up that relationship, the rapport, the preparation that has to go in. It was just so wonderful. So thank you. I do want to make folks aware of future upcoming events. I also popped an evaluation in the chat. We'd love to hear how this was for you, what other topics you might be interested in us supporting in future sessions. Next month, we're going to talk about digital memorialization. So if you know memory boxes, how do we do that virtually? In December, we have Heather D. Horton. She is a lawyer and a coach and a grief recovery specialist, and she's going to talk about DEI and B in grief support. And I'm just going to start plugging this now. And March 18th, we have our Spring Institute coming up. We have Dr. Kenneth Joka. He is our keynote speaker, and there'll be presentations by Good Grief and What's Your Grief as well. So thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at future sessions. Take care.